What would you do if your entire life turned out to be a lie? Could you handle the truth if the person you love had a secret that could destroy everything? In this true crime case, we reveal the horrifying story of a husband who discovers a shocking truth about his wife, one that ends in a brutal, grisly murder. In Houston, Texas, a newlywed husband uncovered a secret so dark, so devastating, that it led to one of the most gruesome crimes the city had ever seen. This isn't just a story about a hidden past or broken trust. It's about a marriage that spiraled into pure horror, shocking even the most hardened detectives. The secret was deadly, and when it came out, it tore lives apart in the most brutal way. On the outside, Marcus Johnson and Ebony Davis appeared to be a picture-perfect couple. Their love story was one straight out of a romance novel, the kind that friends envy and strangers admire. Both Marcus and Ebony were Black Americans from the vibrant city of Houston, Texas, where they first met at a community event organized by their local church. Marcus, a tall, muscular man with a rugged charm, was a 32-year-old construction worker with deep ties to his family and community. Raised in a strict conservative household, Marcus grew up with strong values and a sense of pride in being a provider. He was known for his hard work and dedication, a man who had his life together. His friends often joked that Marcus was the kind of guy who would take care of everyone before thinking of himself. He was a protector, someone who held traditional values close to his heart, especially when it came to marriage. Ebony, on the other hand, was stunningly beautiful. At 28, she was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went, tall with a glowing brown complexion, captivating dark eyes, and an infectious smile. She worked as a hairstylist, building a name for herself in the local beauty scene. People admired her confidence and charm, but what drew most people to Ebony was her warmth and charisma. She had a way of making everyone feel special, and it wasn't long before Marcus was drawn to her like a magnet. Their courtship was quick but intense. Friends and family were surprised at how fast things moved between them. Within months of their first meeting, Marcus was bringing Ebony to every family gathering, proudly showing her off as the one. She fit seamlessly into his life, quickly winning over his mother, siblings, and close friends. Marcus himself had fallen fast and hard, so much so that within a year he proposed. Ebony, with tears in her eyes, said yes without hesitation. To the outside world, it seemed like they were living a fairy tale, but beneath the surface, cracks were starting to form, cracks that Marcus couldn't see, but would later become impossible to ignore. Their wedding day was a dream come true for both of them. Held in the historic Houston Baptist Church, it was a grand affair attended by over 200 guests. The ceremony was perfect. Marcus stood at the altar, his heart racing as he watched Ebony glide down the aisle in a shimmering white gown. She looked like a goddess. Marcus couldn't help but think how lucky he was to have found such a beautiful and loving woman. But even on their wedding day, there were subtle hints of unease, things Marcus brushed aside in the excitement of the moment. Ebony seemed distant at times, her gaze lingering in the distance, lost in thought. When they exchanged vows, Marcus noticed her hands trembling ever so slightly. He chalked it up to wedding day nerves, but there was something else there, something that felt off. Their honeymoon was equally luxurious. Marcus spared no expense, whisking Ebony away to the Caribbean for 2 weeks of sun, sand, and endless romance. Yet despite the beauty of their surroundings, Marcus felt something was holding Ebony back. She would occasionally withdraw, become quiet, and her eyes would take on a distant look as if she were wrestling with something deep within. When Marcus pressed her about what was bothering her, she'd quickly brush it off, blaming it on stress or homesickness. "Don't worry about me, baby," she'd say, wrapping her arms around him, giving him the kind of smile that could melt his heart. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Ebony wasn't telling him. After the honeymoon, life moved forward as any newlywed couple would expect. They settled into their small but cozy home on the outskirts of Houston, a quiet neighborhood that offered them the privacy they craved. On weekends, Marcus worked around the house, fixing up the yard, while Ebony focused on growing her beauty business. It was the kind of life Marcus had always dreamed of. He had the perfect wife, a comfortable home, and a future that looked bright. But as the weeks turned into months, the unease in their relationship grew. Marcus began to notice subtle changes in Ebony's behavior. She became more secretive, locking her phone whenever Marcus was around and disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. She started working late, claiming she had more clients. But when Marcus dropped by the salon to surprise her, he would often find it empty. The excuses became frequent. Meetings with friends he'd never heard of, phone calls she would take in hushed tones. Marcus's suspicions grew, but he didn't want to believe something was wrong. He loved Ebony deeply, and the thought of her keeping something from him felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He loved Ebony deeply, and the thought of her keeping something from him felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He convinced himself that he was overthinking it, that the stresses of married life were simply catching up to them. After all, no relationship is perfect, right? But the tension only increased. Intimacy became less frequent, and when it did happen, it felt strained. Ebony would turn away after, refusing to look Marcus in the eyes. She often seemed on the verge of saying something, her lips parting, as if to reveal a truth she couldn't bring herself to share. It wasn't until one fateful night that everything unraveled. Marcus had always been the type to respect Ebony's privacy, but his growing doubts led him to do something he never thought he would. He decided to search through her things. While Ebony was out with friends, Marcus rifled through her drawers, looking for something, anything to explain the growing distance between them. That's when he found it, a small box hidden in the back of the closet, tucked away under piles of old clothes. Inside, he discovered documents that made his blood run cold. There, among various papers, was a birth certificate bearing a name Marcus had never seen before. Elijah Davis. Confused, he dug deeper and found medical records dating back years, records detailing Ebony's transition from male to female. Marcus's world stopped. He felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. His hands trembled as the weight of the revelation crashed down on him. The woman he had married, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had kept this from him. Ebony had been born male, and she had never told him. For Marcus, it wasn't just a secret. It was a betrayal of everything he believed in, everything he thought their relationship had been built on. His mind raced with a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, heartbreak. How could she have hidden something so important from him? The person he thought he knew felt like a stranger. This discovery would prove to be the first domino in a chain of events that would end in unimaginable horror. What Marcus didn't know at that moment was that his feelings of betrayal and anger were about to spiral into something far darker, something violent and deadly. Marcus sat in stunned silence, staring at the document spread across the bed. His mind raced with questions, but no answer seemed to come. How long had Ebony been hiding this? How could she have deceived him about something so fundamental? For hours, Marcus remained in the house alone, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall only amplifying his growing rage and sense of betrayal. When Ebony finally returned home that evening, she was greeted by the sight of Marcus sitting on the edge of their bed, her most intimate secret laid out in plain view. The moment her eyes fell on the documents, her face drained of color. She froze in the doorway, her hand tightening on the doorknob, as though she were preparing to run. "You lied to me." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with rage. He stood slowly, holding the papers in his hand like evidence of a crime. "Who are you, Ebony?" "No, what are you?" Ebony's heart sank as the reality of the situation hit her. She had always known this day might come, the day when her past would catch up with her. But she never imagined it would happen like this. She had hoped to tell Marcus in her own time, in her own way, but fear of losing him kept her silent for too long. "Marcus, please, I was going to tell you, I swear I was, but I didn't know how. I love you. This doesn't change who I am. Who we are, she pleaded, stepping cautiously toward him, her eyes filling with tears. But her words only fueled the fire inside Marcus. Doesn't change who you are? You've been lying to me this whole time, Ebony. His voice grew louder, more frantic, his mind struggling to process the shock. You tricked me into marrying you. Do you know what you've done? I gave you everything, my love, my loyalty, my life. And this whole time you've been lying to me about the most basic thing, who you really are. Ebony's tears streamed down her face, but she held her ground, desperate to make him understand. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you, Marcus. You mean everything to me? I thought if you knew, you wouldn't love me anymore. Marcus's face twisted in fury. You thought right. He spat the words with venom, his anger spiraling out of control. His mind was a whirlwind of betrayal, disgust, and confusion. The room seemed to close in on him, his once beloved wife now feeling like a complete stranger. The argument grew more intense with every passing minute. Marcus's anger was like a live wire, unpredictable and volatile, while Ebony was trapped between trying to explain herself and fearing what Marcus might do next. She had never seen him like this, so out of control, so full of hate. As Marcus yelled, pacing back and forth across the room, Ebony's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the rage building inside him, and it terrified her. Marcus, please, just calm down. We can talk about this. I'll answer any questions you have. Just please don't do anything rash, but Marcus wasn't hearing her anymore. In his mind, everything he had built with her had been a lie, and he couldn't think straight. All he saw was red. His hands clenched into fists, his breath quickened. Calm down, he barked. You've been lying to me for years, and you want me to just calm down? In a blind moment of rage, Marcus stormed into the garage, his eyes landing on a hammer. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, returning to the house with a chilling determination. As Ebony stood frozen in the bedroom, her eyes wide with fear, Marcus approached with a hammer in hand. Without warning, he swung the hammer down with brutal force. Ebony screamed, trying to shield herself, but Marcus was relentless. Blow after blow, he struck her with a terrifying fury, her cries for mercy drowned out by his blind rage. The walls of their home were soon splattered with blood as Marcus continued the savage assault. The brutality of the attack was so severe that detectives later described it as one of the bloodiest crime scenes they had ever encountered. But Marcus didn't stop there. Marcus dragged Ebony's lifeless body into the bathroom. His mind spiraled deeper into madness as he grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer. The rage had taken full control now. Any sense of humanity gone. He began to mutilate her body, slashing and cutting with reckless abandon, disfiguring her beyond recognition. By the time the authorities arrived, Ebony's body was barely identifiable, her face and body marred by Marcus's unhinged brutality. When the police finally broke through the door, the scene they encountered was nothing short of a nightmare. Blood soaked the walls and floor, and in the middle of the room, Marcus sat covered in blood, staring blankly at the scene he had created. His expression was one of haunting disbelief and madness, as though he couldn't comprehend the horror he had just unleashed. In a daze, Marcus grabbed his phone. His hands shook as he dialed 911, the weight of what he had done settling in. I killed her, he whispered, when the operator answered. His voice was hollow, devoid of emotion. The operator tried to keep him on the line, asking for details, but Marcus could hardly form a coherent thought. All he knew was that his life was over. When the police arrived, they found Marcus sitting on the floor beside Ebony's lifeless, mutilated body, his face stained with tears, his hands covered in her blood. The man who had once been a proud, hard-working husband was now a broken shell, consumed by the weight of his actions. The news of Ebony's death sent shockwaves through their tight-knit Houston community. As the media picked up the story, the gruesome details of her murder and her secret were revealed, sparking a nationwide debate. Some painted Marcus as a man betrayed, while others condemned his actions as nothing short of monstrous. But in the end, nothing could bring Ebony back. What had started as a secret, kept out of fear, had ended in a brutal, grisly murder. When the police pulled Marcus from the blood-soaked floor of their suburban home, the full gravity of the tragedy became immediately apparent. Neighbors stood outside, horrified whispers floating in the humid Houston air. Blue and red lights bade the scene in an eerie glow, reflecting off the shattered lives inside. But Marcus, still covered in Ebony's blood, seemed to touch from reality, his blank eyes staring ahead as if he couldn't fully comprehend the nightmare he had created. The detectives who arrived on the scene were seasoned professionals, but nothing could prepare them for what they saw that day. Ebony's mutilated body was unrecognizable, lying in a pool of blood in the bathroom. The walls, once pristine, were now a grotesque canvas of violence. The entire house seemed to echo with the horror of what had taken place. A home that once symbolized love, now forever stained by death and betrayal. At the police station, Marcus sat in an interrogation room, his blood-stained clothes removed, replaced by a simple white jumpsuit. Yet no matter how much he was washed, the horror of that day lingered on his skin. Hours passed as detectives tried to piece together what had driven him to such unimaginable brutality. "Why did you do it, Marcus?" one detective asked, his voice steady but probing, trying to find a crack in the wall of silence Marcus had built around himself. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus looked up, his eyes hollow and haunted, were filled with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. I didn't know what I was doing," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I loved her, and she lied to me. She wasn't who she said she was." The detective leaned forward, his tone becoming more insistent. "So you decided to beat her to death? And then mutilate her. Do you realize what you've done, Marcus?" Marcus's gaze dropped again, and he remained silent, as if the weight of his actions was too much to bear. It was clear that something had snapped in him, a fragile mind pushed to the breaking point by a combination of betrayal, rage, and his own deep-seated insecurities. The brutal crime made headlines across the nation, not only because of its shocking violence, but also because of the controversy surrounding Ebony's past. The revelation that she had been a transgender woman sent shockwaves through the media, sparking debates on gender identity, secrecy, and the limits of trust in relationships. Some called Marcus a monster, a man driven by his own insecurities to commit an unspeakable act. Others, disturbingly, framed him as a victim of deception. As the trial date approached, Marcus's legal team prepared to mount a defense centered around emotional distress, attempting to portray him as a man who had been so betrayed that he lost control in a moment of madness. The defense argued that Marcus had been pushed to the brink by the shock of discovering his wife's secret and the deep emotional toll it took on him. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They presented Marcus as a cold-blooded killer who had brutally murdered his wife in an act of savage rage. Ebony's character was put under scrutiny, and her private life became fodder for the tabloids. But the focus remained on Marcus, whose actions on that fateful day would be dissected and analyzed in court. Witnesses were called to testify. Friends and neighbors described Marcus and Ebony as a happy couple. Though some noted that Marcus had always seemed a bit controlling, as details of the crime scene were revealed in the courtroom, photos of the blood-splattered walls, the hammer used in the attack, and Ebony's mutilated body, the jury sat in shocked silence. One of the most gut-wrenching moments came when Ebony's mother took the stand, her face etched with grief. She recounted how much her daughter had loved Marcus, how she had always worried about telling him the truth, but hoped that one day he would accept her for who she was. Her words hung in the courtroom like a heavy cloud. She just wanted to be loved, and instead she was murdered. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments, and emotional pleas from both sides, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Marcus showed little reaction as the sentence was read, his face a blank mask of resignation. He had gone from a newlywed husband with a promising future to a convicted murderer, his life now a shell of its former self. As he was led from the courtroom, Marcus glanced up at the gallery where Ebony's family sat, their eyes filled with pain and loss. It was clear that no amount of justice could ever bring her back or undo the damage that had been done. Even after the trial, the case continued to stir debates online, racking up millions of views on YouTube as documentaries and clips of the trial circulated. Ebony's friends and supporters mourned the loss of a woman who had simply wanted to live her truth, but paid the ultimate price for it. They created a viral #Justice for Ebony movement that called for greater protection and rights for transgender people, bringing attention to the high rates of violence against the trans community, especially Black trans women. The house where Ebony had been murdered was eventually sold, but neighbors say it never felt the same. The horrific events left a scar on the community, one that would take years to heal. Meanwhile, Marcus's family tried to come to terms with the horrifying crime, with some members claiming they never truly knew the man capable of such violence. This case isn't just about murder. It's about how secrets, when buried too deep, can explode in ways no one expects. Ebony's life was cut short, not because she wasn't brave, but because the world wasn't ready to accept her. Marcus's uncontrollable rage is a chilling reminder of the dangers that come when identity, trust, and masculinity collide in tragic ways. This case, sensationalized on across social media, continues to serve as a grim example of how deeply rooted fears and societal pressures can tear lives apart in the most brutal of ways. Thank you for being with me until the end of this video. If you like true crime videos, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the videos I post every day. Thanks to all of you dear ones.